The day I was terminated from the massive empire I quietly constructed was the exact day my legal traps snapped shut. A freshly appointed executive named Brenda strutted into my office on her very first morning and demanded my immediate removal. She was completely intoxicated by her family connection and truly believed that a glossy new title gave her supreme authority over my life. Brenda held her Master of Business Administration diploma like a weapon while reading a rigid script from her tablet screen. The junior human resources representative standing behind her was visibly trembling because he knew the fragile ground they were walking on. I did not argue or raise my voice because 3 decades in corporate boardrooms teach you exactly how to handle fragile egos. I simply handed over my security badge and walked out. Brenda did not realize that a ticking clock had started the moment she signed that termination paperwork. While she was likely celebrating with expensive champagne in my old corner office, a certified legal courier was already distributing massive packets to our investors. For 20 years, I remained the hidden backbone of this organization while the founding family took the public credit. I chose to receive my compensation in silent company equity rather than temporary cash bonuses. When the original founder named Harrison was struggling with early compliance issues, I stepped in to stabilize the entire operation. Harrison was a visionary who could not manage basic financial books, so he offered me a vice president title which I flatly refused. I demanded shares instead because it is always better to own the ceiling than to sit under it. By the 8th year, my ownership climbed drastically due to messy divorces and family scandals. Through quiet negotiations and buyout clauses, I eventually secured a staggering 72% majority stake in the entire corporation. Hidden deep within the original shareholder agreement was a specific safety feature known as Clause 17. This rule stated that if any non-equity appointee terminated an executive officer without a formal board vote, all executive powers were immediately suspended. Brenda had unknowingly walked straight into a legal landmine that was buried 17 years ago. Upstairs in her new glass office, Brenda attempted to establish her dominance by ordering the Information Technology Department to revoke my system access. The technology director looked at the master registry and immediately noticed my name listed as the primary administrative authority. He took his laptop straight to the legal department instead of following her reckless command. The lawyers told him to leave everything untouched because the entire corporate infrastructure was legally anchored to my digital profile. Brenda sat at her desk trying to compose a boastful social media post about tough leadership decisions, but her digital dashboard suddenly froze. She attempted to approve her own travel expenses, but the system generated a flashing red error message. She tried to broadcast an internal memo to the staff, but her administrative privileges were completely blocked. The corporate systems were not crashing. They were actively rejecting her presence because she possessed no real authority. Miles away at an exclusive country club, Harrison was enjoying a round of golf when his mobile phone rang repeatedly. It was his panicked general counsel demanding his immediate return to the headquarters for an emergency meeting. Harrison rushed back in his golf attire and stormed into a silent conference room where nobody was smiling. The lawyers informed him that his new daughter-in-law had just triggered a catastrophic clause that stripped the family of their control. Harrison turned pale as the legal team explained that the termination of a corporate officer by a non-equity employee was completely illegal. He desperately suggested rescinding the firing, but the lawyers clarified that the automatic clause could not be reversed once filed. The emergency clock was ticking loudly, and the entire board was legally required to convene within 3 hours. Harrison realized he had handed a loaded weapon to an amateur who did not understand the safety lock. The boardroom filled quickly with anxious investors who had cancelled their personal schedules to address the sudden legal emergency. Brenda walked into the room wearing a pristine cream suit, still projecting an aura of unearned confidence. She marched toward the prominent chair at the head of the long table, assuming she was leading the session. The elderly board chairman named Arthur raised his hand and coldly informed her that the seat was strictly reserved for someone else. The general counsel read the official suspension notice aloud, completely shattering the remaining illusions of the young executive. Brenda looked at her husband and then at Harrison, but both men kept their eyes glued to the table in deep shame. She weakly questioned who could have possibly authorized such an aggressive countermove against her. Arthur looked directly at her and stated that the true owner of the company had activated the emergency protocol hours ago. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I turned the door handle and walked into the tense boardroom. I wore my standard black suit and carried a single leather folder containing the certified shareholder documents. The room became completely silent as I walked straight to the head of the table and opened the file. I did not sit down because standing in that room communicated an absolute dominance that no title could ever grant. I spoke in a calm and measured voice, formally requesting a binding vote to dissolve all executive appointments made within the past 48 hours. Harrison looked entirely defeated, appearing much smaller than the arrogant patriarch who usually dominated these rooms. Brenda looked as though she might lose consciousness as she watched the board members immediately second my motion. They understood that 72% of the voting power was currently resting in my hands. After the board adjourned to process the paperwork, Harrison requested a private conversation with me in the adjoining room. I slid 2 distinct options across the wooden table for him to review without any emotional theatricality. The first option was a complete buyout of my massive shares at 10 times the current market valuation. The second option was a total restructuring of the company where I would officially assume the role of executive chairwoman. Harrison weakly stated that he never intended for the situation to escalate to this extreme level of conflict. I reminded him that he should have carefully read the legally binding documents before allowing his family members to run rampant. He realized that my name was embedded in the very foundations that kept his entire empire legal. I gave him exactly 24 hours to make his final decision before the official transition paperwork became permanent. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the corporate headquarters was completely stripped of its usual pretense and arrogance. Harrison submitted his formal resignation email to the entire staff just minutes before the morning shift began. Brenda arrived at the building looking completely exhausted, her previous confidence entirely deflated. Her security access badge failed to open the front doors, and a guard politely escorted her away from the property forever. I entered the morning briefing and took my rightful place at the head of the table to begin the restructuring process. We focused on real corporate governance, eliminating the useless ceremonial titles that had almost ruined the operation. True power does not originate from a loud announcement, a fancy nameplate, or a privileged bloodline. It comes from understanding the hidden wiring inside the walls and knowing exactly how to protect what you built.